Assalamu alaikum, welcome to English Literature with Aisha Noor. Today we're discussing To the Lighthouse. The plot, characters, themes, summary, and all the symbols used in To the Lighthouse. To the Lighthouse is a novel written by modern writer Virginia Woolf. We have discussed the biography of Virginia Woolf in the previous video. If you need the biography, you can visit the link given below in the description. Virginia Woolf is an essayist, critic, feminist writer, and a member of Bloomsbury Group. She never went to school and got early education from father's library. She married a literary person. She battled depression and died in 1941 by drowning herself in River Ouse. Moving towards the plot of To the Lighthouse, it does not have a traditional plot but consists of a series of experiences, emotions, and feelings expressed by symbols. The novel To the Lighthouse is basically divided into three sections. First one is the window, time passes, and third one is To the Lighthouse. The first section of the novel takes place during a summer afternoon and evening in a summer home on the Isle of the Skye in Hebrides. The second section is Time Passes. This section covers about 10 years in the novel. The last section is To the Lighthouse, and this section lasts only one day. Themes of To the Lighthouse. There are a number of themes in To the Lighthouse that are isolation, light, repetition, time, art and religion, psychoanalysis, fear of drowning, feminism, the subjective nature of reality, and art as means of preservation. The symbols used in To the Lighthouse. The lighthouse, Lily's painting, the Ramsay's house. Modernism and feminism are very important concepts that are used in To the Lighthouse and also some other novels of Virginia. Modernism in To the Lighthouse. To the Lighthouse is a modern novel. It is written by Virginia in 1927, which uses elements taken from Mrs. Woolf's own life. Feminism in To the Lighthouse. Virginia Woolf is a feminist writer. Feminism is seen in various ways in the novel. Mr. Translate's belief about women seem to represent type of thoughts, fears Woolf was feeling during the era. Mr. Translate claims that women can't write, women can't paint, and later he refuses to be made a fool of women. Feelings that Lily had for Mrs. Ramsay supported lesbian and feminist Virginia Woolf. Women in novels seems to play a strong and very important role. This is all about the feminism in To the Lighthouse. Character list of To the Lighthouse. Mr. Ramsay, Mrs. Ramsay, Lily, James, Paul, Minta, Charles, William, Augustus, Andrew, Jasper, and many more. Let's see the details of some important characters of To the Lighthouse. First one is Mr. Ramsay. He is dominated by rationality. He is in search of truth and greatness. He neither affectionate nor sentimental. His wife becomes irritated with his insensitivity. Next character is Mrs. Ramsay. She is loving, hospitable wife and highly domestic. She is focusing on her role as wife and mother. She deeply admires her husband but cannot tell her husband that she loves him. She dies in her 50s. Third one is Lily, and she is a young, unmarried painter, friend of Ramsay's. Lily is the character that shows lesbian personality of Virginia Woolf. Lily begins a portrait at the beginning of the novel that she cannot finish until 10 years later. This portrait was of Mrs. Ramsay. She ended it after 10 years when Ramsay reached To the Lighthouse. James Ramsay, his youngest Ramsay child, 6-year-old when the novel began. He adores his mother and violently resentful of his father. He enjoys cutting images out of magazines and wants desperately to go to the lighthouse when he is young. Paul Raleigh, a young friend of Ramsay's. Paul proposes Minta on beach as Mrs. Ramsay wished. Minta Doyle, young women visiting Ramsay's at their summer home. She accepts Paul's marriage proposal. Let's see short summary of the novel. Its first part contains Mr. Ramsay and Mrs. Ramsay, a philosopher, their 8 children, and several guests are staying at the family's summer home in Hebrides on the Isle of Skye, just before the start of World War I. Just across the bay is a lighthouse, which becomes a prominent presence in the family's life. James Ramsay, the youngest child, wants to go to the lighthouse the next day, but Mr. Ramsay crushes his hopes, saying that the weather will not be pleasant enough for the trip. James resents his father for his insensitivity as well as for his emotional demands on Mrs. Ramsay, and this resentment persists throughout the novel. The house guests include Lily, an unmarried painter who begins a portrait of Mrs. Ramsay, Charles Stanley, who is not very well liked, William Banks, whom Mrs. Ramsay wants Lily to marry but Lily never does, and Paul Raleigh and Minter Doyle, who become engaged during their visit. Mr. Ramsay also watches her as he walks and worries about his intellectual shortcomings, afraid that he will never achieve greatness. Andrew Ramsay, Nancy Ramsay, Paul Raleigh, and Minta Doyle talk a walk on the beach where Paul proposes to Minta. For the evening, Mrs. Ramsay has planned a dinner for 15 guests, including Augustus, a friend, and a poet. The dinner gets off for a shaky start as Mr. Ramsay becomes angry with Mrs. Carmichael for requesting more soup, and no one seems to be enjoying the conversation. Second section is Time Passes. Time passes, the house is abandoned for 10 years, suffering the ravages of time, neglect, and decay. Mrs. Ramsay unexpectedly dies one night. Third section is The Lighthouse. All of the living Ramsays as well as other guests, including Lily, return to the summer home. Just as Mr. Ramsay decides to finally take this journey, Lily Broske decides to finally finish the painting that she started 10 years ago. On the boat, the children continue to resent their father's self pity, yet, as the ship approaches the lighthouse, they find a new tenderness for and connection to him. As the boat reaches its destination, Lily paints the final stroke on her canvas and finally achieves her vision. If you need notes and slides on this topic, visit my Facebook page. The link is given below in the description. Subscribe my channel and don't forget to press the bell icon.